Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Multi-Ministerial Task Force COVID-19 Press Conference. On our panel today, we have Minister for Health, Mr. Gan Kim Yong, Minister for National Development, Mr. Lawrence Wong, and Director for Medical Services, Professor Kenneth Mak. May I invite Minister Gan to begin with a few words. Minister Gan, please.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us at this press conference. Sorry we are a bit delayed. Over the last 2 weeks since we entered phase 1, the number of cases in the community has remained stable and under control. Most of the cases were detected as a result of active screening of workers as well as contacts. The incidence of cases in migrant worker dormitories has also declined and under control. There are so far no indications of new large clusters emerging. But we must not take this for granted. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for your effort that you've put in to keep everyone safe. We are now ready to move to phase 2 of our reopening, which will begin after 18th of June. In this next phase, our goal is to ensure that efforts taken during phase 1, as well as a circuit breaker to reduce the risk of transmission, are sustained. On one hand, we want to allow economic and community activities to resume, while on the other hand, we must continue to keep infection under control. This is a very delicate balance we have to strike, and to succeed, we will need the collective effort of every Singaporean to be socially responsible and adhere strictly to safe distancing measures. Minimizing prolonged close contacts with others, mask wearing, and good hygiene practices remain key strategies in the next phase. Apart from a small list of exceptions, phase 2 will see the resumption of most activities. Safe management principles will become even more crucial beyond just the rules and regulations. As a result, individuals must maintain safe distancing of at least 1 meter at all times. Where appropriate, such as at the F&B outlets, dining in, we will allow groups of not more than 5 to be seated together with 1 meter safe distancing between tables. There should be no mixing between the groups. Similarly, small group social gathering of up to 5 persons will also be allowed. Within the home, households may also receive up to 5 visitors at any one point. Basically, it's a rule of 5 and 1. Groups of 5 or 1 meter apart. All health services, including aesthetic services and elder care services in the community, will resume with safe distancing measures in place. Face-to-face visitations at nursing homes will also be allowed with precautionary measures. While the vast majority of activities will be allowed to resume at the start of phase 2, the resumption of a small number of activities will take more time. Overseas and local experience has shown that these settings can result in large clusters of infections, which we have to avoid. We are engaging these business and organizations on their safe management measures and advising them on the steps to take to be able to open later safely. My co-chair, Minister Lawrence Wong, will share more on the other activities that will open in phase 2. Phase 2 is a significant step in moving towards a new COVID-safe normal. The multi-ministry task force will continue to monitor the situation closely with the aim of continuing to ease measures until we reach a new normal in phase 3. With a range of activities resuming in phase 2, the number of close contacts between individuals will increase. We therefore expect to see more new community cases. With more testing, we will also expect to see more cases being detected proactively. To keep the number of new cases under control and prevent large clusters, it is critical that we continue to remain vigilant so as to protect ourselves and our loved ones. This way, our efforts over the last 2 months will not be wasted, and we can safely move towards phase 3 and look forward to phase 3 to come in time to come. Thank you very much. I'll now say a few words in Mandarin. 过去的这2个星期，社区病例维持稳定，客工宿舍的病例也逐渐减少，情况受到了控制。我要在这里感谢国人的努力，大家都辛苦了。我们现在准备好在6月19号开始启动第2段的重新开放。我们将一方面恢复更多的经济和社区活动，另一方面也必须继续控制好感染的情况。要做到左右兼顾，需要大家集体的努力，负起社会责任，也要严格遵守保持安全距离的这个原则，减少与他人有长时间的接触，戴上口罩以及维持良好的卫生习惯，依旧是非常关键的。主要的理念是，在一般的情况之下，所有的人无论在什么时候都必须与其他人保持至少1米的安全距离。在一些饮食的单位、餐馆或者是熟食中心，我们会允许不超过5个人一同坐下来吃东西，但是桌子之间的距离必须保持1公尺。我们也会允许不超过5个人的小组聚会，家里也可以同时接待不超过5个人的房客。在这第2个阶段里面，所有的医药服务也将恢复，这包括了中医服务和乐龄护理。我们也将在做出防范措施下，允许有限度的探访疗养院里面的住户。尽管绝大部分的活动会在第2阶段启动时就恢复，但还是有一小部分的活动或许需要更长的时间才能够恢复。国内外的情况都证明了，有一些场所比较容易导致有大规模的感染群的形成，所以我们要格外的谨慎。黄循财部长将接着下来会分享更多有关第2阶段的详情。第2阶段活动服务后，人与人之间的密切接触将会增加，我们因此预料也会有更多的社区新病例的出现。要继续控制这些病例的数量，我们就必须继续保持警觉，这样的话才能够保护自己以及保护我们的至亲。由于年长者特别需要我们的照顾，他们也必须格外的小心谨慎，尽量留在家里不出门。我们在迈向新常态的时候，需要调整我们的习惯，养成新的生活作息。我们不能够松懈下来，以避免有新的大规模感染群的形成，这就白费了过去2个月来的努力了。我相信，只要我们大家能够保持谨慎，继续努力，我们就能够保障国人的安全，一起迈向新常态。谢谢大家。I'll now invite the Director of Medical Service to give a quick update on today's medical situation.
Thank you very much, Minister. As of the 15th of June 2020, the Ministry of Health has preliminarily confirmed an additional 214 cases of COVID-19 infection in Singapore, and the vast majority of these cases are work permit holders residing in foreign worker dormitories. Based on our investigation so far, there are 3 cases in the community, all of whom are work pass holders, and for today, there are no Singapore citizen or permanent resident cases reported. These figures are consistent with our understanding that at this time, the committee case volume remains low. The number of committee cases is low. And the recent cases that have arisen come from committee screening of high-risk groups or vulnerable groups. In fact, many of these are old infections, are asymptomatic. They're not fresh infections at all. Our sentinel surveillance mechanisms or framework also have demonstrated a very low caseload existing in the community. The circuit breaker and phase 1 periods have allowed us to fine-tune and improve our contact tracing capabilities and shorten our response times to make sure that if cases arise or clusters emerge, we would be ready to step in decisively, quickly do contact tracing, and quickly throw a ring around to isolate these cases and close contacts to prevent further spread. We've also taken the opportunity during this period of time to improve our healthcare capacity so as to prepare ourselves in case new community clusters emerge as we move out into phase 2 of resumption of services. But nonetheless, risks remain, and we are fully cognizant of the fact that we may have new cases emerging as the community return to many of the routines that they were accustomed to before the implementation of the circuit breaker measures. It is therefore important for me to emphasize the need for all of us to continue to be vigilant and to play our part. It is important for us to keep our close contacts low as we move out into the community and to continue to restrict our travel to that which is necessary, whether for work or for social reasons. And where possible, by default, we should continue to work from home. There is no need to rush to open, even though we now have allowed for a wider range of services to resume. And the measures that we recommend, including keeping gathering sizes small, less than 5, and to maintain safe distancing measures, must continue. If we all act sensibly, we can continue to keep the risk of infection in the community low. It would not be zero, but it would be within a range that we think we can control to prevent further spread in the community. And it's therefore important for all of us to maintain our social responsibility, to do our bit as we return most of our services into the community.
Good evening. We earlier said that we will provide an update in the middle of June after assessing the situation in the first 2 weeks of June through this period of phase 1. And as Minister Gan had shared earlier, we have looked at the situation carefully. The infection is under control throughout this period, and therefore we now are able to enter into phase 2 from Friday onwards, basically after 18th of June 2359. So from this Friday onwards, we will be in phase 2. The way to think about phase 2 is as follows. Unlike phase 1, where we still had quite a number of restrictions in place, in phase 1, the default setting was many things remain closed and we only selectively allowed certain things to resume activities in order to manage the risk. Phase 2 is different. Phase 2, the default will be most activities will resume and open, and only a small exception will be left to be done later. So what will open in phase 2? Essentially, retail businesses may reopen their physical outlets. F&B, dine-in will be allowed to resume, subject to liquor sales and consumption ceasing at 22:30 hours. We will not allow live music and television and video screenings in F&B outlets at this stage. So the F&B dining is permitted in groups of 5. You go and eat, but don't linger around too much, and no music, no video or TV screening, because we do not want that noise around the environment causing people to speak more loudly than they need to, spreading droplets while they eat, or to linger around for longer than necessary. Besides these, retail shopping malls will be open as well, subject to capacity limits. Personal health and wellness, home-based services will be allowed to resume. Registered clubs and societies can operate at their registered premises. Tuition, private enrichment classes can resume, with the exception of singing or voice training classes at this time. Again, because it is a higher risk activity, so we are not allowing the classes that involve singing or voice training. All other healthcare services, including elder care services in the community, individual health screening, aesthetic services will resume. Face-to-face visitations at residential facilities for the elderly will also resume with precautionary measures in place. Sports, parks, public facilities will be open. This include playgrounds, beaches, lawns and fields, swimming complexes, sports halls, gyms, fitness studios, function rooms, and this would apply not only to public facilities, but similar facilities in private settings such as condominiums and country clubs. So we will put out the full list of businesses that are allowed to operate on the MTI website, and businesses who are in this list will not need to apply for an exemption come the effective date, with effect from the effective date. Essentially, the list will cover quite a wide range, and so the vast majority of businesses we expect will be able to reopen, but with the key condition that safe distancing measures must be in place, and we try to simplify this as much as possible. We say that individuals must maintain the safe distance of 1 meter, and each time there is a group of people coming out at the same time, it must not be more than 5 persons. So it's a 1 meter, 5 persons rule. Right? Other than that, many of these businesses will be allowed to reopen. There will be some exceptions, and as I've described, we have tried to keep the exceptions list small, but there will be some small number of activities that will take a bit more time and will not be able to restart immediately at the beginning of phase 2. These are activities which we have highlighted before. They are activities involving large numbers of people that are likely to come into close contact, often in enclosed spaces or for prolonged periods of time. And our experience in Singapore and also overseas experience has shown that in such settings, they are of higher risk and they could result in large clusters forming. So these are your super spreader events, if you will. Right? And the activities and settings include religious congregations, your large venues like libraries, museums, large-scale events and venues including conferences, exhibitions, concerts, trade fairs, as well as entertainment venues like bars, nightclubs, karaoke, outlets, cinemas, theaters, as well as indoor and outdoor attractions. So these will take a bit more time. The government agencies are continuing to engage the relevant businesses and organizations on the safe management measures that would be needed for these specific activities and settings. And subject to these safe management precautions and requirements being put in place, at a later date, we will be able to allow these to resume progressively over time, but not at the start of phase 2, because we still need time to engage all of these businesses and organizations and ensure that the appropriate measures are put in place. So there are also specific rules that we are putting in place for specific settings and events. For example, for weddings, we are allowing for added flexibility, where wedding solemnizations at home or at the ROM or ROMM may take place with up to 10 persons, excluding the solemnizer. And if it's at other venues, they may take place with up to 20 persons. For wakes and funerals, we are allowing up to 20 persons to be present at any one time. So these are the guidelines for the start of phase 2. It will allow many more activities to resume. And once again, as my colleagues, the Minister Gan and Professor Mak have highlighted, I want to appeal to all Singaporeans to be responsible in undertaking the activities that are permitted under phase 2. Do not treat phase 2 as a signal that we can all relax, we can all let our guard down, and we can now go out and do all our favorite activities. I think if we were to take that kind of a mindset and attitude, it will be very easy for phase 2 to end up with a surge in cases and potentially down the road the likelihood of having to reintroduce restrictions which I don't think any one of us would like to see. But if we are responsible in upholding all the precautions and safe distancing measures that are required of us in phase 2, if we use the space and the activities that we now can undertake, if we take that responsibly, continue to, by all means, go out, but limit the number of contacts that we have to a small group, and take all the necessary measures, be disciplined, be vigilant, then phase 2 will allow us to resume some level of normalcy in our daily lives while continuing to keep COVID-19 at bay and continuing to control the infection. So that's something that we want to achieve. The government cannot do this alone through rules or through restrictions. All of us must do our part and work together to move towards phase 2 in a sustained and safe manner. Finally, before I close, I thought I should also highlight that even as we are reopening our economy and society, we are also taking steps to reopen travel. We've highlighted before that we are establishing green lanes with several countries. We've established with China, and we are continuing our negotiations and discussions with other countries so as to broaden these green lane arrangements. In addition, as we do this, we expect more travelers coming back to Singapore. We will now put in place a new requirement to test all incoming travelers, on top of the stay-home notice requirement that is already in place. So all new incoming travelers from the date of 17 June 2359, with effect from that time, all will be subject to test towards the end of their SHN. Right? So the specific requirements, how they will be notified, we will put out these details in due course, but the key is we will be testing all of them. In addition, because we are continuing to monitor the situation in different countries, the risk of importation from abroad, it varies from country to country because various countries and regions are at various stages of putting in place effective systems to control the infection. So we will also adjust our border measures to take into account these differences in risk. In particular, for travelers entering Singapore from specific countries and regions, specifically Australia, Brunei, Hong Kong, Japan, Macau, mainland China, New Zealand, Republic of Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam. For travelers entering Singapore from 17th of June 2359 and have remained in these places which I just cited in the last consecutive 14 days prior to their entry in Singapore. We will allow them to serve the stay-home notice at their place of residence instead of a dedicated facility. Right? So it's only for this group. If they're coming back from these specific areas, then the SHN can be served at a place of residence rather than a dedicated facility. They will, all of them, whether you're serving your SHN at home or in a dedicated facility, all incoming travelers will still, as I said earlier, be subject to a test. With the arrangements that we are putting in place, we do expect to have the ability now to also allow more long-term pass holders overseas to return to Singapore. We have all this while been allowing them to come back, but we regulate the flow of returnees coming back. And because we now have more capacity for testing, for SHN facilities, including the possibility that some may serve their SHN at home, we are now able to facilitate the re-entry of more long-term pass holders in the coming weeks. And we will do so particularly for those with deep roots to Singapore or have exigent circumstances. And finally, we will make one other change on our border measures and travel arrangements. For all up to now, the cost of tests and the cost of SHN facilities have been borne by the government. But looking ahead, as we expand or as we reopen for more travel, we will want to move to a more sustainable position. And so Again, for all inbound and outbound travelers who enter Singapore from 17 of June 2359 and leave Singapore from 17 June 2359, they will be required to pay for their COVID-19 test. In addition, for those who have to serve their SHN in a dedicated facility, if you are not a Singaporean or permanent resident, then you will have to pay for the full cost of the SHN facility as well. So those are the changes we'll be making on the travel front and in terms of our border measures. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I open the floor for questions, let me just re-emphasize that with the commencement of phase 2, it is not business as usual back to where we were before COVID-19. I think we have come a long way since then. Many things have changed. At the time when we first started, we have press conference where all of you were seated here. Now we have virtual press conference. So things have changed and we are not about to go back to the same situation we were before. So even with the start of phase 2, we need to continue to observe safe distancing measures. And in fact, social responsibility and personal discipline will become even more important as we are going to see more interaction between people. And rules and regulations is one thing, but personal responsibility, taking responsibility of yourself and be self-disciplined is even more important to protect yourself and protect your loved ones and your family members. So I just want to remind all of us that safe distancing measure, our personal discipline and the social responsibility will play an increasingly important role even as we open up and embark on this phase 2. Thank you. Now I will invite questions.
Thank you, panelists. Members of the media, we have emailed embargoed press statements to you earlier for your reporting purposes. Please note that these are embargoed till after the end of the press conference. We will now begin with the Q&A session. Members of the media, please remember to use the raise hand button if you would like to ask a question. Please also only ask one question to allow for more to participate in this Q&A. May we have the first question from Timothy from the Straits Times.
Thank you, Ministers, DMS. I'd like to ask, as more people are out and about, how will you ensure the 1 meter 5 persons rule on public transport? And how much longer will mask wearing be mandatory? Also, is work from home still default? Thank you.
So the public transport issue already arises today. Right? It's not in phase 2. We have already explained that even in phase 1, with more people out and about, we recognize that it will be hard to maintain physical distancing on the public transport. But it doesn't mean that we cannot take safe management practices, and that's our measures. And that's why we've put in place a range of measures, including wearing of masks on public transport, and we ask everyone to refrain from talking to one another or talking on the phone. At the same time, we've asked all the public transport operators to step up their cleaning regime. So all of these measures have been put in place in phase 1 and they will continue to apply in phase 2. And goes on to your second question with regard to wearing of masks. Yes, the wearing of masks will continue to apply as a requirement in phase 2 whenever you are out. Right? So there's no change to the rule regarding wearing of masks. And then finally, on working from home, that's actually a very important, that continues to be an important measure for phase 2. So we would still ask all employers to make work from home or telecommuting a default setting. Right? So even if more businesses are allowed to reopen, they should continue to ensure that the staff, their employees who can work from home, continue to work from home. That would also help with the public transport issue that you highlighted, because even if more businesses were to open, but if they continue to maintain the discipline for their staff to work from home, then hopefully that will reduce the number of commuters during peak periods. There is also another, I think for the businesses themselves, it's also in their interest to want to operate in this manner. Because remember, if the businesses do not take safe management practices seriously, if they have lots of their employees come back to the workplace, not socially distanced, they come for meetings together, should there be an infection at the workplace, then potentially many of their employees will be quarantined. The entire workplace may have to be shut down. But if workplaces are responsible and they do what is required of them, but also do what is in their own self-interest, have split team arrangements, team A, team B, have as much of their staff work from home as possible, then even if there were to be an infection in the workplace setting, the business may not need to close, and many of the staff may not be impacted because they would have been separated, many would be working from home, so there would be business continuity. So I think it's in the interest of all businesses, while we allow for them to reopen in phase 2, they should take the safe management practices very seriously and continue to have their employees work from home to the maximum extent.
I think we also need to bear in mind that all these precautionary measures, preventive measures, have to be taken in a package so as to overall reduce the overall number of community transmission. So once the overall community transmission can be controlled, can be reduced, then the risk of any particular setting, whether it's public transport, whether it's a workplace, will be reduced. So therefore, we need to put in place measures at every possible place. Say, for example, if you go to a restaurant, if you were to eat with your friends, it's not possible to wear masks in the restaurant. And therefore, we have to accept that when you're eating in a restaurant or in a hawker center, you have to remove your mask. But then it doesn't mean that, therefore, we don't have to wear masks everywhere else. All the more we need to strengthen the preventive measures elsewhere so that overall we keep the number of cases low. So I think they complement one another. All the measures work together to help to prevent transmission to the extent possible. So I think we have to bear in mind that, therefore, I emphasized earlier that even as we open up in phase 2, we need to, in fact, further strengthen individual responsibility and discipline so that we can help, each of us can help to keep the number of cases low, so that despite the increased interaction between individuals, the transmission can still be managed because we ourselves are disciplined. So I think all these measures must work hand in hand as a package so that they will be more effective.
Thank you, Ministers. Can we have the next question from Yun Zhou from Zaobao?
Can't hear you.
Okay. I think this should be. Good afternoon, Ministers. Just, I think that advancing to phase 2 is a major leap, and I think we would like to seek some clarity on the activities that will be allowed to resume. For example, some of these activities that fall under grey areas, ranging from, say, a massage, facial, manicure. Some Singaporeans have also raised this, and even including, like, say, 4D betting and activities like MPS, and even if say the G is conducted in phase 2, if there's a walkabout, then what would be the relevant guidelines be? Thank you.
So, as I said earlier, I think the thinking and the mindset for phase 2 has to be shifted from a default, everything closed, only a few are permitted, to now default, most are open, but only the exceptions will have to be done later. I've cited the exceptions, right? The ones where I talked about earlier, religious gatherings, large venues, large events, entertainment venues like bars, nightclubs, karaoke outlets, cinemas, and all that. Those will come later. Other than those, we expect all other businesses to be able to open at the beginning of phase 2. And that would include the ones you cited, whether it's massage, spas, 4D outlets. They are all in similar settings. They are in retail, they are in shops, they are in our neighborhood shops. All of these were in a similar setting. They will be allowed to reopen at the beginning of phase 2. In terms of activities, we've highlighted if you're out and about, then the rule of 5 would apply. So you can go out with your friends to exercise, to go on a walk, then up to 5 people, but not more than that. And all must wear masks.
Well, we've expanded the list of services that can actually resume, It's important that we emphasize that employers and business owners do need to act sensibly and act responsibly. And that requires them to still ensure that safe distancing and safe management measures are instituted in the business place. If they are not able to assure and do this, then despite the fact that their service or business is included in the list that's technically allowed, they should think very carefully about whether they should rush to resuming services and businesses. What is important is that they have to act responsibly to help to bring that risk of exposure of infection spread down before they resume service.
Can I just also build on what the Director of Medical Services just highlighted, which is a very important point, that we want businesses to take the rules seriously and not to endanger their own customers or their own employees. I can understand many businesses are very keen to reopen and would like to do so as quickly as possible. But if they were to rush into this without adequate preparations, they put themselves at risk, they put their customers at risk, they put their staff at risk. Worst of all, if something were to happen, if an infection were to happen, clusters were to break out, the entire business will have to be closed all over again. So it doesn't help them to rush into this without adequate preparations. Or even if nothing were to happen in terms of an infection, a new case or cluster, but if they are unable to implement safe management practices properly, if large queues form and the business owner is unable to manage the crowds within their business premise, again, that would be a breach of the rules. It can apply in a mall, it can be a shop, but if the business owner doesn't have the proper processes and systems in place to manage all of these things, then it would potentially be a breach, and we might have to take enforcement action to ask the business owner to close temporarily until they are able to put in place the adequate systems and precautions. So, to all the business owners who are, very eager to want to reopen, we ask them to take this time between now and the beginning of phase 2 to put in place all the necessary systems, precautions, safeguards, and make sure that all of these are in place before they embark on their reopening.
Thank you, panelists. Can we have the next question from Rachel from CNA Digital?
Hi, my question is that how soon will it take for all those on long-term passes to be allowed to return to Singapore, bearing in mind that some of them have already been waiting for months? And also, what's the criteria that will be used now in deciding who will be prioritized for return beyond those with deep roots to Singapore or have exigent circumstances?
Yeah, I don't have the specific sort of details in terms of timeline, but as I've said before, as I explained earlier, we do have the capacity now to allow the re-entry of more long-term passes back to Singapore. The agencies, in particular the Ministry of Manpower as well as the Ministry of Trade and Industry, have received appeals already. So there are existing appeal cases that they are processing, and of course some of these they would process earlier, but then they would work through the list, and some who are overseas may not want to come back, but those who want to come back, the capacity for testing, as I said, is higher. The ability to house these returnees in dedicated facilities, we now have more facilities in place as well. So we do expect to be able to allow a larger flow of such returnees coming back to Singapore with all the precautions that will be in place, including testing of all of these travelers.
And I should add that because we also now allow returnees from selected countries to be SHN at home, and therefore you do not require dedicated facilities, and therefore more will be allowed to come back. But at the same time, we also have to bear in mind that there may be additional these long-term pass holders and who want to come back, now that the facilities are, capacities is higher. So we will also see more application to return as time goes on.
Thank you, Ministers. Can we have the next question from Faris from Bloomberg?
Hi, Minister. Just to pick up on what you said earlier about regulating the flow of travelers coming from overseas. What is the scale that we are looking at? Is there a standardized size that you're looking at, like 5,000? And also, what's happening to the expatriates or your employment pass holders who are stuck overseas who want to return to Singapore? Do we know how many of them are stuck overseas and appealing to return back?
Yeah, so I think that's similar to the earlier question. I don't have the numbers with me, but there are, when I talk about long-term work pass holders, they include employment pass holders, right? Could be S-Pass, could be employment pass, could be dependent passes, but these are all in the category of long-term pass holders. We know that there are some who have been waiting for some time to come back, to be with their family members or to come back for whatever other reasons. So because we are now able to increase the numbers progressively, step by step, we will allow more to come back, and we hope that eventually we will be able to clear all the outstanding appeal cases.
Thank you, Minister. Can we have the next question from Stefania from FT?
Hi, good evening. I was wondering, as of now, how long will you be monitoring the situation in phase 2 before starting to get an idea of when phase 3 can start? And what do you need ideally to see in phase 2 for you to make a decision to move into phase 3?
I have to explain that phase 2 actually is a process. Yeah, it's not the end stage, and as we progress in phase 2, we will continuously monitor the situation, and when situation allows, we will continue to ease the restrictions somewhat. For example, today we say there is 1 meter subject to a cap of 5% in any social groups. At some point in time when the situation continues to be stable, maybe in 2 weeks, in 1 month's time, if the number of cases remains stable, we may increase that to 10% or a different number depending on the situation. And for some of the restrictions that are still there today, things like large gatherings, events, or even religious organizations, we are in discussion with them, and progressively when they are ready, when they're able to put in place safe distancing measure, we will progressively allow them to start their operation. Even as they start their operation, we may allow smaller scale to start with, and over time we increase the scale for them to allow more people to join in the events. This will progress as we go along, and eventually when we reach phase 3, basically phase 3 is a steady state. By that time, we are probably going to hold that position in phase 3 for quite a long time, until when a vaccine is available. So basically, phase 2 is a process, and phase 3 is the eventual endpoint. And when that will happen, we do not know, but it's not a static. Once we start end of this week, and then that's it, nothing will happen until phase 3. No, actually, the whole phase 2 is going to be progressive, and as the situation improves or continues to be under control, we may be able to relax some more of the restrictions. Because even in phase 2, there are still some restrictions like a cap of 5 and a 1 meter distance and so on. So we will continue to monitor and see progressively when we will be able to release or relax some of these additional restrictions.
If I may just add, we've explained when we put out the broad outline, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, quite some time back, we highlighted that phase 2 could carry on for months. And that's our thinking, because phase 2, there are, as Minister Gan just explained, within phase 2 itself, there are many parameters that could be progressively eased over a period of time. For example, we talk about the rule of 5 people, it can increase to more later on. We talk about allowing places of worship to get started again. some venues like libraries and museums, conferences, attractions to reopen. Potentially, when they start to reopen, this could happen in a few weeks' time. They could start to reopen at that point in time, but with strict limits in terms of the capacity of the number of people who can enter that venue. And then again, over time, we would increase the capacity limits as we continue to monitor and if we see the situation remaining stable. So we expect this process of review, monitoring, easing. Hopefully it's easing because you never know. Along the way, we might have to slow down or even tighten some restrictions. But we expect this process to continue for months before we reach phase 3.
Thank you, Ministers. Can we have the next question from Deborah from CNA?
Hi, Ministers. I was just wondering how effective have enforcement methods been during phase 1, and will the same level of scrutiny be expected to continue into phase 2? Thank you.
Yes, we will continue to have very tight enforcement on the ground. I mean, if you look at the kinds of activities we have been doing on phase 1, we have officers, safe distancing ambassadors on the ground, reminding everyone to maintain safe distance, to wear masks. We also have enforcement officers taking enforcement actions in our parks, in our HDB estates, housing estates. So they are deployed on the ground, and we will continue to maintain that presence through the safe distancing ambassadors as well as the enforcement officers. Because phase 2 entails reopening in different settings, so the safe distancing ambassadors and enforcement officers will be deployed, not just in parks alone, but also in some of these new settings. For example, in our public sports facilities, in F&B dining areas, to make sure that the tables are indeed separated a meter apart and that the rule of 5 is strictly complied with when people are at the F&B outlet and eating. So these are new areas for enforcement. The assurance is that our safe distancing ambassadors and our enforcement officers will continue to be deployed on the ground to ensure compliance with the rules. But best of all, again, we constantly hate to be a broken record. I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's one thing to comply with the rules just because you have an enforcement officer waiting and you don't want to be fined. But best of all, we encourage everyone to comply because of your own self-interest, right? Because you want to protect yourself, protect your family members, because all of us need to really look at the spirit of the requirements and do our part to allow for the reopening to take place in a safe and sustainable manner.
I must repeat that broken record because this is very critical point. Phase 2 opening is, the scope is quite wide, and therefore it is also very difficult and challenging to try to prescribe rules and regulations for every possible scenario and setting. And I'm sure even as we draw up the rules, people will be thinking of how to get around the rules. Well, the Chinese always say, 上有政策,下有对策. So they always find ways to try to get around the rules, try to fool the social distance enforcer or ambassadors. But I must say that you can fool the rules, but you cannot fool the virus. If you violate the rules, the virus will get to you. The purpose and objective of the rules and regulations is to protect you and not just to penalize you. So let me make that clear. The purpose is really to protect you, to serve as a reference that you know what you should do and what you should not do. So keep to the rule, particularly 5 in a group, 1 meter apart. These are very simple and yet very important rules to observe. And if all of us play our part, we will be able to help Singaporeans to stay away from infection. So I think this will then allow us to progress along this phase 2 opening in a faster pace and reach phase 3 quicker. So I think I urge Singaporeans to cooperate with us and support us and to appeal to you to play our part. Each of us have to play our part to make sure that these measures are effective in helping us control and manage the infection.
Thank you, Ministers. Can we have the next question from Kai from Channel 8?
Hi, I would like to ask, the recent study shows that the COVID-19 virus is mutating, and that's why it caused many people in US and Latin America to die. So do we see the virus mutating in Singapore as well? And will this delay our vaccine development? Thank you.
I would first correct you and say that actually mutations occur in every virus and occur very frequently. We see mutations in the virus causing COVID-19 infection, but that doesn't necessarily imply that mutation variants or strains are more infectious or cause more harm. Certainly, we have not seen any evidence to suggest that recent mutations are causing more deaths, which is what you had made just now. But nonetheless, this is something that we look very carefully at, and we continue to review the evidence and research that's being done in this space. We look towards our scientific experts to provide us with guidance and advice as to what we should do if we're dealing with virus strains that, in fact, lead to a change in behavior of the virus. But so far, there's no evidence to suggest that this is indeed so.
Thank you, panelists. Can we have the next question from Sharanjit from BBC?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm keen for you to address how this phase 2 opening up may encompass the election timeframe and how it could impact campaigning.
The phase 2 timeline is based on what we have discussed all along, public health considerations, what we think are, in terms of taking the risks that we see, the ability to control the infection, and where we think we could allow for the economy and the society to open up safely. So that has always been our consideration, and we've made it very clear repeatedly, because I think this question gets asked almost every other press conference. The election guidelines, the election precautions, safeguards, these are put together separately by the elections department, and they have already explained potentially how, if and when an election were to be organized or held, what sorts of precautions and safeguards would be put in place. So this can happen in phase 2, it may happen in phase 3, no one will know the exact timing at this stage, but should the election be called, the elections department will certainly explain what the precautions, safeguards and campaign guidelines entail. So that's not for this task force to answer. I think you might want to ask the elections department for more information, and they might be able to provide you with more information if they are able to.
Just a point to make that the elections department does consult the Ministry of Health concerning public health requirements that are prevailing. And certainly, whenever an election is called, the prevailing public health requirements will have to be adhered to at that point in time.
Thank you, panelists. Can we have the next question from Aratna from Reuters?
Thank you. This is just a follow-up on an earlier question about the virus mutations. So, Prof. Mark, I wondered, are you seeing more cases of patients that only have a low viral load? And why do you think these patients' viral load does not increase? Is that a signal that the virus is mutating or is even weakening?
We'll have to understand that we have continued to expand our testing strategies. We are now reaching out to workers who work in areas where they are dealing with vulnerable populations. We've been dealing with testing of a larger pool of people who have no symptoms and they're asymptomatic as we reach out into the community. Part of this is in preparation for resuming of many of the services that we have announced today. But as we test more, it is inevitable that we will find more people who have had infections in the past and who remain asymptomatic. And it is not surprising, therefore, that as we test a number of these people, they would show evidence that their onset of illness could have been some time ago. And that partially accounts for why their viral loads are low at the time when they actually are diagnosed through the tests that we do. So these screening and surveillance tests performed in a very aggressive, proactive and extended manner have led to more detection of such individuals in the community. It doesn't necessarily reflect that the virus has changed in any way, such that it's now more attenuated, it's got a weaker cause, and therefore, right from the onset, the viral loads are low. We still don't know enough to be able to reliably predict the cause of infection in many people. We are now beginning to understand that there's this notion of asymptomatic individuals, and as we test more and more, we're picking up more and more people who are asymptomatic, but the test results show that they have in fact had an infection or an exposure to the virus quite some time back. The impact is still something that we are trying to learn more from, but it's not surprising given our test strategies that we're picking up more and more of these people. It doesn't necessarily imply, as I said, that the virus is weaker now.
Maybe I should just clarify that if you look at our data and statistics, it is not really comparable to many other countries because of the aggressive testing that we are doing systematically, going through, for example, the preschool teachers, the nursing home staff and so on. We actually do systematic screening for all these workers on the front line. And other countries, sometimes they test those are symptomatic, and therefore the basis for testing will be different, and the outcomes and the trends and the data base will also be different. Because of our aggressive testing, as DMS explained, we then tend to pick up cases that are milder, cases with a lower viral load, because these cases generally they are sometimes often asymptomatic. Because they're asymptomatic, they don't seek medical attention because they don't feel there's anything wrong with them. And if we are focused only on picking up from clinics, then they will not be detected under normal circumstances. But because we are proactively testing them systematically, and therefore we tend to pick up these additional cases which otherwise would not have been detected, including, as DMS mentioned, past cases which have recovered, but you are still able to detect fragments of the virus, and therefore they tend to be a lower level of a viral load. And therefore our pattern should not be compared to the pattern of many other countries because of the peculiar nature of our testing.
Thank you, panelists. We now have time for the last 3 questions. Can we have the next question from Zulaika from Berita Harian?
Hi, hello, ministers. My question will be regarding the cross-border travel between Malaysia and Singapore. I believe you didn't mention on that. So I would like to know if this is part of the phase 2, and what is the status between on the discussion between these 2 countries? Yeah, thank you.
I don't have a lot more updates to provide other than what we have said the last time around when this question was asked in the last press conference, which is that we do want to see the resumption of travel between Singapore and Malaysia, both by air as well as by our land crossings. With regard to the air travel, then we are also discussing with Malaysia a green lane arrangements that's continuing. With regard to the land crossing, that's more complicated because of the large volume of people that commute every day between Singapore and Malaysia in the past. We do not expect to see the similar volume of people movement in this COVID environment. So I think the numbers that will commute daily probably will have to come down, but the basic idea is that if people were to resume travel across the causeway or any land crossings, then we would need a combination of precautions that would include testing as well as quarantine arrangements for them in order to ensure that the people movements are done in a safe manner, and that's something that both Malaysia and Singapore will have a shared interest in. We want people movement to resume, but we also want this to be done in a safe and sustainable manner. So the exact protocols, the exact safeguards, the numbers of travelers that we can expect, all of these are details that are being discussed amongst the officials at this time.
Thank you, Minister. Can we have the next question from Wen Qi from Wanbao?
Hi. I have questions about, because since mall businesses will be allowed to open, how about the shopping malls? How do we actually control the capacity, the number of people visiting the shopping malls? Thank you.
So for shopping malls, we will look at the capacity limits. Of course, it depends on the size of the shopping mall, and then based on the size, based on the GFA, we will limit the number of people who can go into the shopping mall at any point in time. It's not new. Remember, we did this before. The circuit breaker, we were at high safe distancing measures, and we imposed similar capacity limits on shopping malls. The outcome then, if you remember, was that, in fact, within many of the malls, there was enough distance, people didn't feel like there was a lot of crowding at all, but there were queues that had to be managed outside of the malls. So learning from this experience, we will require the mall operators to have proper queue management outside and not just have large crowds gathering, in close contact with one another. As I said earlier, if the mall operator is unable to manage the crowds, the queues, or put in place proper safe management practices, then we will ask the mall to close. It's better that they close and then only reopen when they are ready to deal with the crowds. But if they are unable to deal with the crowds, then please don't rush to open, because I think it will be counterproductive and it will pose risk to everyone, their staff as well as their customers.
Thank you, Minister. Can we have the last question from Hui Hui from MediaCorp Chinese Radio?
Hi, Minister. Yeah, recently we noticed that when you all announced the locations of the cases, right? It's actually there are a lot of supermarkets and all that, and we also noticed that there are more and more people going to the supermarket, so there could be overcrowding or we wouldn't be able to do with safe distancing. So, are you looking at increasing the measures at supermarkets?
Actually, the capacity limits apply not only to malls. Even now, when the supermarkets are open, they already have capacity limits. So they are required, supermarkets are required to monitor the number of customers who enter the supermarket at any point in time. Safe entry is in place in all the supermarkets. And I'm sure if you have been to a supermarket recently, you will know that you cannot just go in. You have to make sure you go in, you log on to the check-in to the safe entry system, and then you go through. And then they have all the safe management practices in place with regard to queuing, making sure that people are not close together but 1 meter apart. So these are the measures that are already in place today. If there are any supermarket operator that's unable to implement these measures well, whether today or later on in phase 2, and are unable to manage the crowds well, then the same the same principle that I highlighted would apply. Meaning to say, if there is any business operator that cannot implement safe management practices well, we will ask them to rectify immediately, and if they can't rectify, we will ask them to close, because it's better that they stay closed rather than have large crowds gathering in their business premise and put everyone at risk.